You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Hello everyone and welcome back to episode 195 of Arsenal Pass. Hayden here with Pankaj Bhojwani. As always, this week on the pod, Pankaj, we are diving into the mailbag. We're going to the questions. We're going to tackle the hot topics. We got a lot of questions. We got some of my favorite questions I think we've ever gotten on a mailbag episode. Some really thoughtful, in-depth questions, I think.
I'm really looking forward to it. I think this is a perfect sort of time to do a mailbag, just, as we're getting a few spoilers, just as we head into the new season. We've been feeling for a while that, we've been searching for things to talk about. And I think this is a perfect time to just answer community's questions.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to come thick and fast after these next 2 weeks. Next week, we are going to dive into all things preview-wise. We're going to look at on the eve of the world premiere. We're going to start to take a bit of a look, probably a little bit at Limited, but actually mostly about what we're thinking is interesting for Constructed. What are we seeing from the new heroes? We've got a lot of previews coming our way next week. We've got, of course, our preview as well. So, yeah, just before we get into the thick of it, I did want to sort of mention to everyone out there, you might have noticed over the past few weeks we have had some troubles with audio. It should all be fixed now. I want to give a big shout out to Will for his support in helping us get our audio troubles fixed. I think it's hopefully sounding nice and crispy clean. So I hope everyone, audio and YouTube, can enjoy that.
Yeah, the audio issues were a massive headache. Thanks so much to Will for helping us figure that out.
It's always worse than you think. You're like, it'd be an easy fix, but it's so much trial and error trying to get it right when you're recording remotely. It's not like because I've done records, or if I do like gameplays in person, we've done those previously. It's a lot easier to get mic levels right when you're in the same room. All the external factors are the same, but when you're in different places, and me and Brendan had our fair share of troubles as well. And some things it just takes sometimes something like a settings change on a computer or something to change ambient wise to screw the sound up. So yeah, hopefully sounding nice and crispy clear now.
Yeah. Well,
what have you been up to?
That, Hayden?
Yeah, I was going to ask, what have you been up to?
Oh, yep.
This week in Flesh and Blood. Pankaj, have you played anything?
Nope, I've not played any Flesh and Blood. Have been following the spoilers, though. We have seen all the daggers for the heroes at this point. The dagger for Syndra, Fang, and New Arachne. We've also seen the token dagger that actually just came out today. The Graphene something, Claserine something. The token dagger that one of the Arachne Agents of Chaos can equip. And been kind of hype about those. I definitely need to see more of them, because right now, Hayden, I'm coping very hard on Fang.
Oh,
and I need to see more of them so I can accept that he's just going to be bad because they never give us a good warrior. So just need to see more of that so I can stop coping.
So the daggers this time around, not tokens. Apart from the Arachne one.
Yeah. Wait. Yeah, they're not token type, but they're token rarity, right? They're meant to be the draft weapons.
Okay, cool. Just double checking. I was like, have I missed something about this time we have to draft weapons? And I've just completely missed this.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I meant the Graphene Calicera.
Yeah, the one that gets created, right?
That's token typed.
Yeah.
So you can't start. How do you say it? You can't have that in your deck list. Something needs to create it, and you equip it. Yeah. But the others are token rarity. Yeah.
I thought it was interesting, mark of the Huntsman, the assassin weapon, the dagger we've seen is assassin weapon, right? Like, it's not Chaos Assassin, it's not tied to, unlike, the Kunai of Retribution, which is the Draconic Ninja weapon, that is a Draconic Ninja weapon. Like, it's not just a ninja weapon. And same with the Obsidian Fire Vein, which I thought was quite interesting.
And even the token weapon, the Graphene, I really don't know. I need to figure out, someone needs to tell me how to pronounce the second word. The Graphene token weapon is also not Chaos Assassin. And there was a ruling that also was clarified on today that Uzuri, if she gets access to a dagger like that, can actually use her ability on it because it does have stealth. And then it just ceases to exist. It doesn't go to the bottom of the deck or anything. It just ceases to exist. But yeah, it's just also not Chaos Assassin, so that'll be pretty cool.
Is Azuri going to get access to that?
I mean, given that it's not Chaos Assassin, And given that there was a ruling clarifying it, maybe like it's probably some normal assassin card that gives you access to it. We'll obviously have to wait and see. But I was super excited to see this because finally the wording on Tarantula Toxin is explained, where why it can say choose both. It says target dagger attack gets +3, or target a defending card gets an attack with stealth gets -3 defense. You can choose one or both. And now we know an answer for how you can choose both, because there's a dagger with stealth.
Yeah, I'm in anticipation of seeing next week's flood of previews. I feel like it's really going to give us an understanding of, it's going to give me an understanding of, I think, what I'm most excited about, particularly selfishly, but I think it's also going to give us an understanding of what this next sort of format's going to look like, what the impact of these heroes could potentially be. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. How's your week been in Flesh and Blood?
Again, it's quiet. I've stuck to my guns. I said after Worlds I'm going to take a break from playing Flesh and Blood, and I did play some Flesh and Blood Living Legend mostly in the lead up to the calling that I didn't play, but was just interested in the format. I didn't end up going to any local events. I will go back to playing some at the start of this year once the new set's out. But yeah, it's actually been a nice break. But as of next week, it's back to playing Flesh and Blood, so I'm looking forward to it. I was messaging some of my testing group, and I was like, okay, I'm itching. Like, I'm missing these our usual 1 to 2 hour sessions, a couple of nights a week sort of thing. Like, I'm ready to start exploring, and I get to play Classic Constructed with the Hunted very soon at a calling with Calling Christchurch. So yeah, no Flesh Blood this week, but mostly just been the year's kicked off with a bang work-wise, and I've still been trying to play some games that I've been using my downtime on. I've been playing a bit of Factorio as well. If anyone's ever played Factorio, I really like that game. I played it a lot. Was it COVID? Or it was either COVID or post-COVID. I can't remember when it came out. I think it was COVID, and then I was just gone back to it a little bit. They actually just released DLC as well. So yeah.
I'm super excited to start brewing. I already have sort of stub deck lists for all the 3 new heroes. Mm-hmm. Where it's just it's a hero, and I've put the 9 to 12 Majestics you're always going to play, and the rest of it is just empty. I'm just waiting for more spoilers. My Arachne list obviously has Codexes in it, and then Justinix and Bonds, and I'm just waiting for more stuff. All right, so with that, let's move on to the news. Well, part of the news is that we got more previews. We've already spoken about that. Other than that, our preview, the Arsenal Pass preview card, will be releasing. We'll be previewing it on January 16th in US time, January 17th for the Australian, New Zealand folks.
Mm-hmm. And we're gonna cook something up.
Spicy one.
Yeah, we're gonna cook something up this weekend. Me and Pankaj have set aside some time to come up with something fun. So, well, in theory, something fun. We'll see.
We hope it'll be fun.
Yeah.
Also, this past weekend there were a couple of battle hardens. So shout out to Pudding from Team Blue Pitch from Hong Kong winning a battle hardened on Aurora, and also Naib from Team Runaways from the US winning on Zen this past weekend. Two of the premier aggro decks in this format, I'd say.
Yeah, what happened to Enigma?
Died to the aggro decks, I guess. I think there was some in the top 8s of those battle hardens, if I recall the bracket correctly.
I think there was. I think it's interesting. I feel like, if I think back to post Worlds and to the ban and restricted announcement and to the following weeks with events, it felt like Enigma, it's just the best deck. But the format has responded, and I think people are building in ways because Enigma's had to adapt, with the restriction of blessings. I think the Enigma decks look a bit more linear, so you know what to expect a bit more, I think. And I think that's really played into aggro's hands, which is maybe not a factor that I considered, that actually the restrictions on Enigma would help the aggro decks build more specifically, and it would actually change the Enigma decks so much. So yeah, it's been really interesting to see Zen, Aurora, the aggro decks rise to the top. So to me right now, Zen seems like potentially the best deck in format. And I think the thing is that for me it's Zen and Enigma, I think, and I think Aurora is good, but I think it is Zen and Enigma, which puts Nu in such a weird position right now, I think, which is, I'm sure you're maybe not, because is Aurora a good matchup for Nu?
No.
Yeah, so that's the problem.
A well-played Aurora is not a good matchup for Nu.
That's the problem.
Yeah, and Enigma as well, obviously, is in a good matchup. There's ways to fix it. I mean, there's things to make it better, but it's obviously not a favorite matchup. Zen, I would say, is still favored, but when 2 of the 3 most represented or top decks aren't favored, I'm not too high on Nu's position, but CYB Nu still, it still asks a lot of questions of your opponents. So there's
I think it's just interestingly it makes Zen. That's what puts Zen to the top right now for me. I think is the fact that Nu is in a tough position because Aurora is also very popular. But anyway, off topic.
All that's about to change with Hunted. Actually, to be fair, I don't think Nu's position is going to get better with the Hunted, just based on these Draconic heroes not having lots of blues and seeming like they're going to have good numbers on small hands, just like Aurora. I could see Nu not having a great time, but we obviously have to wait and see for that. The other piece of news I wanted to shout out is that LSS now officially has a new official coverage producer who is none other than Sam O'Byrne, one of the 3 floating guys. I'm sure most people know him, one of the other casters, one of the best casters in the industry for sure. And I'm extremely hyped. I just want to shout him out for getting this very, very well-deserved position. And I'm just so excited and looking forward to what he's going to do in this role.
Yeah, shout out to Sam. I think we spoke a little bit about coverage, I think week before last actually, and more to come this year. Every year it gets more and more exciting. So, all right. Well, with that said, news all done and dusted. Commander Cookout and the main topic this week, I guess, all in one, as we tackle community questions, all of your questions from the Twitters, the X's of the world, the emails, the Discord, the little messages we get sent, all these things. But if you do want to get a question in for the Commander Cookout in the future, you can do so, arsenalpassfab@gmail.com. If you want to email it, you can also drop it in the Discord if you are a patron, and you even drop in the YouTube comments below. We have a few questions from YouTube as well for this week. So get your questions in. Let's get straight into it. We're going to go one by one and picking questions because we got a lot, and I think we said last week we're going to get through them all. We're not going to get through them all, just realistically, but we are going to pick some of our favorite ones, and be rest assured, in some way, shape or form, we will get to these questions in some way in the future, in the next month or so. Where am I gonna go? I'm gonna pick off this one from Peter Budensek, who we both know. Mask Momentum on Twitter has asked us, or on X, if you could buff a class in the game to help the overall meta for all time, what class would it be, Pankaj?
For me, it's Warrior. I think Warrior just captures the feel of Flesh and Blood very, very well with the whole win by inches sort of thing. Warrior's a lot about jockeying for position, and also when it comes down to the end game, they have a very, very interesting end game and sort of like how they ask your opponent. They are just incredibly interactive, and they do powerful things, but not in a way that makes it feel very unfair. Like, I think about Blood on the Hands on Kasai, for example, or Glistening Steelblade in Dawnblade Dory. They're powerful cards, but it doesn't feel unfair because of how much you can interact with them. And also that the ceilings aren't so ridiculously so high that you just feel like you had no agency. But a game against Warrior and a game playing as Warrior always feels like both sides had a bunch of agency and a little bunch of points of interaction, and I really like that.
Yeah, I would like to see Warrior have more of a presence in the format. Like, I've played Flesh and Blood since day dot, and Warrior has had some of the least impact of any class, honestly, which is because it actually it was the most popular hero in Welcome to Wraith, and it was like, it's going to have, Warrior's going to have success. It's going to be one of the it classes. It's going to be one of the main classes of the game, and basically since Welcome to Wraith, and I guess to a lesser extent Arcane Rise and Crucible, apart from PTLA, Warrior has had very, very minimal to honestly no impact. So
there was one season. Yeah, there was one season, which is the Heavy Hitter season, where Warrior had some relevance. And even then, the best one was Hatchet's Dory, which is kind of like just the most boring flavor of the Warriors. And you compare like Dawnblade Dory, you compare like what Kasai is doing. Even like Bolton, no, it wasn't that. It was just the Hatchet's Dory hit and run sort of deck. And I'm with you on that.
Yeah, Hatch's Story was just doing like a bit of a Guardian impression, to be honest. Like value build, trying to control the game state and play into an in game, which leads me to my answer to this question, which I actually think Guardian. I take this question, specifically the last part of Peter's question, which is to help the overall meta for all of time. And I think when Guardian is in around a tier 1 to tier 2 are the most healthy metas. That is just how I've felt. I think Guardian plays a game plan that is generally fairly linear or is fairly understandable for all players of the game. I think it's one of the best classes to get into the game on and understand the basics of attacking and blocking and turn cycles. I think, people point out, Starvo was a problem. Yeah, that's fine. I don't disagree, right? Like a super pushed class is a hero is always going to be a problem. But I think when Guardian has had a role to play and not been overpowered, I think it has been really healthy. It brings elements of fatigue into the game, but not in a way that I think is degenerate or just a pure fatigue as a win condition. I think it makes you have to think about your threat density. I love those sorts of games. I think it also is balanced in the fact that it can't do everything, and slower decks, more setup-based combo decks can always exploit what Guardian's trying to do. But yeah, I think that would be my answer.
To some extent, it also brings the second cycle thing into it, right? Whether it's a mirror or whether, the Guardian versus Warrior matchup, for example, second cycle is very, very important. Goes back to a threat density you're talking about. So I agree with you on that for sure. I think Guardian is another one of those classes similar to Warrior where it's just, there's something about how it teaches you many fundamentals of the game and touches on many different axes of the game, like the pitch stacking, the second cycle stuff, and the threat density and potential for fatigue. Then you think about them having the best weapon. I will say though, aside from Starvo, I think even Oldhim, I would argue, was perhaps Oldhim was a little bit too on the. I'm not sure how good that was for the overall health of the game. But I look at the current Guardians that are legal, like Bravo and Victor and Jarl, and I think, I'm totally with you. Like, if those are relevant in the tier 1, tier 2 spot, then I would say that's somewhat indicative of a healthy meta.
Yeah. I've always liked what Oldhim did for the format. Like, you're going to hate me saying this as an Icelander player, but I thought Ice was much more enjoyable to play against the Guardian than it was to play against the Ice Wizard, just from a purely what it did to aggressive decks in particular. Like, I thought aggro decks into Oldhim were interesting, right? And when it came to aggro decks into Icelander, sometimes they were interesting. Like, I think the Fire matchup was particularly interesting, but for other aggro decks, it felt either fantastic or miserable, and I like it when it feels somewhere in between, right? So,
I'm with you. No, I don't. Right. I don't hate you for that. I'm under no illusion that Icelander was way more constricting to the meta than Oldhim was. Like, I will agree on that. I'm not gonna try and defend that part. So in terms of health of the format, I would say I'll put Oldhim and Icelander in similar spots where it's like they were really, really good, but I'm not entirely sure if that's indicative of a healthy format. Whereas something like Jarl, Bravo, and Victor, I would put in the category of this is like they're much easier to deal with, and just feel more fair.
I think you said
instant speed CLF is just nonsense. Like that.
Yes. Instant speed hypothermia. You also said under illusion. I think it's a Guardian, not an illusionist, but I understand. Also,
great pun.
Last little point I thought was an interesting point is you mentioned second cycle. It just jogged my memory that for the first about 70 episodes of Arsenal Pass, me and Brendan talking about second cycle was just a running joke for our audience of second cycle isn't a real thing, and then we got vindicated eventually. So I'm always down for more second cycle gaming, but
yeah. I mean, right now it's not a thing either. So
no, well,
CYB new maybe a little bit, the new mirror somewhat, but otherwise not too much. All right, next question. This one kind of targeted at you, Hayden. It comes from Michael Yaskor on Twitter. It says, why does @Fiendale not understand the true power of Leviah or Phi?
I feel like I need to give some context to this. So, Mr. Michael Yasker is a big Leviah stan. Played Leviah at PTLA. Has also threatened to play the effective Cheerios Phi deck for so long. The 0 for 3, the head jab deck, right? Which you can just play with Phi. Your weapon is irrelevant effectively, unless you can tune it counter.
It's a doubles F.
Yeah, it doubles F and needle when tune it counters up. You
doubles F and needle. No, it runs Vest of the First Fist.
Oh,
so when
sure.
one of your things goes through, you just pop it and you swing both the needles and you don't care if they break.
Yeah,
it's so dumb.
4 damage or 6 damage if they block. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I think the reason... I think Phi is been a very solid hero, and I think I'm also down for Fire to have a bit of a resurgence with this new set. So I have no problems with Fire being reasonable. Do I think Fire has true power in this recent few metas? No, definitely not, but I don't think many people would. Leviah, I will stand by my take on Leviah, which I think I might have mentioned once since we've been recording together, Pankaj, but I know I definitely mentioned on the pod before, which is I just genuinely think that Leviah has to either be unplayable or broken. Like, I just think the way that hero is designed with how it interacts with Banish and how it interacts with just variants, and I just think at some point the variance doesn't matter because the power level is so high, or they print a card that fixes the variance and the hero is just too good in the current state of Flesh and Blood, or it stays as is. And I just think it doesn't hit a lot of the tenets that I think are important when it comes to selecting a deck and deck building for a deck to be successful. That is consistency. It is a simple, repeatable end game, or eventual dominance through board control, and the ability to be able to play out of poor variance positions. For instance, if I take Guardian, for example, you start the game poorly, but because of incremental advantage over the next 20 turns, even though you got bad variance in the first 4 hands, you can eke back the advantage you lost. And Leviah just honestly can't do any of those things. It has power, yes, but other than that, it doesn't have those things. So sorry, Michael. Right now, it's out.
She does have, I guess to your point, she has a very, very low floor, but a very, very high ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, if they increase the floor, then it feels like that very high ceiling doesn't quite have the drawback that it should have. But then if they increase the ceiling further, then the low, I get what you're saying. It's a tough balance to strike.
If no one's ever,
in terms of the,
I just want to say, if no one's ever listened to an episode we did prior to you joining the pod, Pankaj, I'm not sure if you've listened to this episode. We had Brian, I'm sure you have actually, because I think you might have mentioned it before. We had Brian Gottlieb on the pod, well, the first time we had him on, I think, and we asked a question about the role of consistency versus power in Flesh and Blood, and he used Leviah as a prime example and said very clearly they want more heroes like that with high ceilings and low floors. So I don't think Leviah is ever going to have such a change that it becomes, like you say, the floor gets raised. I don't think that's ever going to happen. But what I do expect is that we will actually see more heroes in that similar position, and I think that makes deck building really interesting, because if at some point all of the Ultims of the world, the Zens of the world, the Enigmas of the world, these heroes with that bit more consistency rotate out or go to Living Legend, what does the game look like?
We have been seeing a shift away from hyper consistent into injecting a little more variance into the game, but I do still feel, at least like right now, at least we don't have the Oldhim equivalent in terms of consistency, but at least the heroes that we've had for the past year or so have been not like Leviah levels of low floors and extremely high ceilings as well. Back to the Leviah topic real quick. Ethan, Mansant, one of the best Leviah players in the world, has this saying that if you take Leviah to a tournament, you will not do any better than X2 in the Swiss rounds, because you will always lose 2 games to the terrible flaw that the hero has and just that variance. And you have to make sure you win every other game where variance doesn't screw you over, which I think encapsulates what we were both talking about.
Yeah, it doesn't sound very enjoyable to me, but that's all right. I'm going to flick down to another question here from Aaron Newson, shout out to Aaron Newson, a New Zealand native, one of my favorite people. Used to call him the Torso. Aaron Newson asks, does foiling your deck out make you play better, similarly to how dressing nicely might make you feel better? Pankaj, what do you think?
Not for me personally, but that's because having a foil deck doesn't necessarily, and I just don't really have too much attachment or too much draw to having that kind of shiny cards. I do like my equipment pieces, being cold foil and maybe even cold foil extended arts, but the cards in my deck, I don't care too much of them being foil or not. So not for me personally, but I could totally see it. I think in the end, it comes down to whether you are the type of person that has more fun playing with foil cards, because I've definitely spoken about this before. I think the more fun you are having, the better you are playing the game. The more engaged you are, the more you care. And that just directly translates to how well you play the game. So if you are the sort of person that gets a lot of enjoyment from having a full foiled out deck, especially if it's a deck you really relate to, like Ethan, for example, has a full foiled out Leviah deck with, all the just like the max rarity of every card you could possibly have, then, you know, if you're that sort of person, then yeah, I could see it working. It's just not for me personally. What about you?
I think it's such an identity thing. Like I think that example of Ethan is great. I think the closest I've ever come to having this is Kano. Like I had a foil Blitz Kano deck because I loved playing Kano a ton in Blitz. Like I actually think Blitz Kano is the most fun I've now thinking about it and reflecting on it. Some of the most fun I've ever had in Flesh and Blood. When Kano, you know, I'm talking like the first ever Blitz events. Crucible of War was legal. This is before even like Monarch and stuff was printed. I think for me, honestly, no. Like it actually gives me a bit of anxiety to have foils in my deck. It makes me worried about bending or marked cards potential, things like that. So it's actually, for me, as like a competitive player, it's a headache I don't need. Like it's the one I'm actively trying to avoid. But I am with you. Like I do like cold foils on the board. I do like playing with. I do like I like an aesthetic board. So I like my sleeves to match. I like my sleeves to match my dice. I like even my like pen to match as I can as well. And when I look down at the board, if I have 4 cold foils equipment on the board and the exact same sleeve, that is a contrast probably, unless I'm playing something like Levia, to my sleeves of my deck. That's what I like to see. But when it comes to actually the deck I'm playing or shuffling, I'm similar to you. Like I have no real attachment to foils, and actually I prefer to just never have anything to do with rainbow foils or even cold foils on my deck. So
I recently picked up in Japan, actually, a cold foil Mask of Recurring Nightmares. Cold foil, the Japanese extended art as well. And I got it signed by Aswardi there. So yeah, that's one of those pieces, like you're saying. Like on the board, it's there. I really like that part. But yeah, going back to the deck thing, aside from just the anxiety for potentially having marked cards, the other thing is that, especially leading up to a tournament, there's still a lot of iteration happening in your deck, right? Maybe, you know, there'll be a few cards here and there that you're switching. And my other problem with having a full foiled out deck is that I may not have foils of these other cards I might want to randomly add in, like the past few days, like in the few days leading up, right? Like, for me, the closest I came to was Icelander, where I was like, ooh, should I foil out this deck because I really love it? But then, you know, one day I was like, wait, I need to put Weather Vanes and Encases in my deck and Freezing Points. And like, what was I supposed to go hunt down foil Weather Vanes and Encases because the rest of my deck is foil? It's like, you know, it's just so much of a headache to add all these other random foils. And then it's like, so if I'm switching out like Sinks and Fates in and out, just switching out all these cards, you need to find foil versions of the ones you want to put in. And yeah, I just don't really want to deal with any of that.
And then also when you start thinking about foils, are they alpha foils? Like, I shout out to Nick Butcher. He is actually someone who I think he genuinely plays a lot better with like a max rarity deck because it's just like it's tied to his psychological makeup. Like he just is he just loves it so much that I think he's like, oh, I need these cards, last minute change. Oh, I can't find like the version I want of this card. Like, oh no, it's a alpha foil Fate instead of a Chinese Fate for Scene or something like that. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, that's too much of a headache. So next question comes from Thomas WBG1810. What's your top 3 pack 1 pick ones of all time? I recently got the Open Induction Chamber Fall Asleep 3-0.
Yeah, that's a classic. I think this might be Thomas out of New Zealand, who is a player who's played regularly on the PT scene. I think I know Thomas. This is a great question because I think top 3 pack 1 pick ones of all time. I think what Thomas alludes to, you know, I got the Induction Chamber Fall Asleep. Like, you know, that isn't a top 3 pick to me. That's like a bottom 3 pick. So like, what are the spicy, fun, exciting picks? Is how I took this question. What are yours?
I took it as this bomb won me the draft.
Oh, there we go. See, we've got 2 different answers. I love it.
Yeah, so I can go ahead and start with mine because that's a lot less spicy. Everyone who's played these formats will know instantly that, yeah, you kind of just lose to his card. The opponent has it. Manifestations of Murokai from, you know, MST. You draft that. You kind of, as you pack 1, pick 1 that, you kind of just cruise. Germinate. Was just very recent. Rosetta. And then, because last one is a bit of a smaller extent, but I did want to shout this out because I really liked it when I managed to get my hands on this card in WTR draft, and that's Red Pummel.
Card's good.
Yep. Card's fun. What are yours? Yeah,
well,
those balmy ones.
Yeah, I've got 3. My top of all time. I think I had a good think about this, but I do also. I want to just go off yours a little bit. I think thinking about pure power level is quite interesting. And I think Frosted Hammer is like one of the most egregious or Crown of Seeds. Honestly, Tales of Aria had a lot of them. So early sets did because of it's so interesting. You talk about Miragai and Germinate. I think early sets had so many because of the legendary and like the non-expansion slot that we have now. Whereas now they can, you put that into the cold foil slot. So Mask of Momentum, for instance, in like WCR, and like obviously you wouldn't see these very often, but when you saw them, it was just like, oh my gosh.
And Dread Scythe and Monarch as well, right?
Yep.
Like that's not even a legendary. That's just
majestic.
Yeah, that would just happen.
Yeah. I think another good example of why. One, I think. Well, there's two things. We haven't seen weapons in a majestic slot, really. And if we did, I think we'd be seeing them in that cold foil slot anyway, moving forward, which is I think very, very fair. So yeah. Oh, mine.
Rip Verdance once again.
Yeah. Ice Quake Red, I think, is one of my favorite pack one pick ones of all time out of Tales of Aria, and a big part of that is its powerful cards. I think it's a really solid pack one pick one that you would always or often take if it's in the pack, unless you had an aversion to ice in that format. But I think it led to really interesting drafts. One of sort of famously one of the favorite archetypes of Arsenal Pass is the Go Tall Lexi Dominate deck, and this was one of the most powerful. Actually, it's good in the Go Wide as well. But this card is just so interesting. I think it led you to any kind of Lexi build, but particularly that was quite fun. And then in Ultim, it also had to make you think about your cost structure in Ultim, as opposed to I'm just swinging the weapon and blocking out. Like, it actually changed the way you played. So yeah, I really like that card. What else did I have here? I had Red Savage Feast, the rare from Welcome to Wraith, the discard a card and then you draw a card if it has 6 more power. One of my favorite archetypes to play in Welcome to Wraith draft is like Quicken Rhina. So like traditionally Flock of the Featherwalker is not good in Rhina because of all the 2 and 3 costs, but actually if you get one of these early as a rare, then you can draft the Flock of the Featherwalkers and draft this like Go Wide club deck, which I think is quite fun. And then lastly, Icelander, probably my favorite hero of all time to draft, and I think my favorite pack one pick one to take when drafting Icelander was probably Red Aether Hail.
I love Red Aether Hail. I loved it in CC as well. Like all my Icelander lists, even when Bullander was a thing, always had at least one Red Aether Hail. I can't let go of that card. It's so great.
Do you have a favorite like sentimental pack one pick one then? Obviously you spoke about power, but if you took it from the lens I took it, is there anything that comes to mind for you? I know you're not a big drafter. That's the thing. Like, you're more a constructive player, so I guess it's
sentimental. I mean, the Red Pummel, which I spoke about, kind of comes close. Actually, it might be Red Sink Below. Actually, just again from WTR. That's just solid card. It's solid, strong. It's not bomby, but you're just always happy to have a Red Sink Below.
The sync factor is also so much more interesting than in Classic Constructed, because you're going to see that card again in Welcome to Wraith Limited. Like, the way that it plays out, you're almost always going to see that card you sync. So it is such an interest. Like, your decision is actually really, really fun, interesting, and often pivotal as well. So
second cycle happened in that format and was often a win condition too. Like, I remember this draft where I was on Rhinar, and then I didn't have the sync, so I did have to pitch away the Alpha Rampage. But you imagine it sinking away Alpha Rampage in that spot, and your opponent doesn't even know about it. Yeah. I have this series I would love to do one day. Maybe you can help me out, Pankaj. Maybe we can make it happen. I want to revisit the limited formats prior to heavy hitters with 30 card limits. I want to do it. I want to do Welcome to Wraith. I don't really care about Arcane Rising, honestly. Well, actually maybe, because it might make it more playable, but I would like to do Welcome to Wraith. I actually don't want to do Monarch. I don't care about that. I want to do Welcome to Wraith, and I want to do mostly Welcome to Wraith. I'd like to do Tales of Aria as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Outsiders could be fun with that too. And actually, I think heavy hitters as well. I'm not sure what you said before heavy hitters. I would include heavy hitters in that as well.
Wait, wasn't heavy hitters the 30 card limit?
No, not yet.
Oh, it wasn't either. It was, the first time was...
Yeah. Was...
Pardon,
I guess it was MST then. No.
Wait,
am I trolling? Was it 30? It might have been 30. I might be trolling.
It was definitely heavy hitters.
Oh, it was heavy hitters? Damn it, my bad. Okay, yes. Okay, well, so I was confusing it with Bright Lights for some reason.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. No. Then yeah, okay.
Maybe we can.
Oh, actually, bright lights with 30 cards would actually be interesting as well.
Yeah. Well, it can't be any less interesting. That's for sure. So, my question next, right? So we'll go to. Make sure I get this right. Dehimono TCG. Hopefully, I got that right. On X asks, what do you think about mirror matches in Flesh and Blood? Often matches between equally skilled players feels like a who drew the key card first game. Pankaj.
Yeah, there are not many mirrors in this game that I have enjoyed. The Guardian and the Wizard mirrors come to mind as, in my opinion, very, very fun and skill intensive. And actually, we saw this recently, even in the LL calling, right? The Starvo mirrors were very, very interesting, exciting to watch, and there was a ton of skill expression. I think that was happening in CC as well. When we watched older mirrors, it was obviously a slog and it takes forever, but there was a lot of skill expression going on. The better player nearly almost won. And I felt similarly with Wizard as well. Icelander mirrors and Kano mirrors. If you're a Wizard player and you played against another Wizard and they didn't have experience in a mirror, you kind of just like won the game on the spot. But not because of, you drew your key card first. You just knew how to execute everything so much better. So Guardian and Wizard come to mind, but I do agree that most other mirrors in this game I have not been as excited about, particularly like the aggro mirrors, right? It's why I avoid heroes like Aurora, even though I've been a proponent for a while that I think she is best deck in format. It's not a hero I'd want to play just because it does fall into the, when you play the mirror, it kind of be like, the top 20 cards of the deck were just had the Channel Lightning Valleys and had the whatever power cards and mine didn't. Or like, when Art of War was around, Fi and Zens were in that same spot as well. And actually, it was even worse before the book banning, right? Because even the die roll mattered so much back then. And now it's gotten better, but it's still, I can't say I enjoy the most mirrors very much.
I think mirrors have been at their worst in the past year, honestly. To your point, the year before the book banning as well, I think. Then there's exceptions, right? Like, I think the Fire mirror with Stubby Hammers was atrocious, for instance, like to your point. But I think Guardian comes to mind as well. I think Ultim is probably my favorite mirror I've ever played as Ultim mirrors. I think they were super, especially probably later on. I didn't play as much Ultim earlier on. I've heard they've always been pretty good. And I think I agree with you about the Wizard. I actually personally don't like Wizard mirrors. I think the Kano mirror could be sometimes interesting. I hated the Icelander dance of like, pass the turn. 2 cards that pass the turn. I just don't find that kind of gameplay enjoyable. I know a lot of people do. I didn't love it. Also, I think and this is a Blitz example, but like Kano or even in CC sometimes, even if you were like both really skilled players, sometimes the games felt like non-games because you would be like, oh, this is the correct decision in this position like every single time. And then they're like, oh yeah, I got the 15% where I just kill you. And you're like, yeah, cool. Okay, nice.
See, that didn't happen in Icelander though. I do agree that happens at Kano mirror sometimes, but not with Iceland. But
it doesn't.
But fair enough. I could see I could see where you're coming from.
I just don't like the making no plays a lot of the time, like, and if it just because one thing I'll say about Icelander, you say it's not about drawing your key cards, but actually what often happens if you're the first player to get all 3 energy potions down?
Yeah, so a lot of times, I mean, obviously there's still the variance there and stuff, but I think what I found was that there were a lot of games where one person's finding their board state pieces, but the other person is punishing them by sending like wounded bulls and like just these attacks, and then it becomes on. Just there's a play on both sides where one person's sort of playing that combo-y style, but the other person's playing tempo. Yeah. And so I think the reason why I really enjoyed it was because it was very dynamic. Not every mirror looked the same because sometimes both people are finding the combo pieces, sometimes they're both finding their tempo sides, and sometimes you're on one and the other person's like didn't find the combo pieces, but you found it, and you need to know how to navigate that on both sides. I found that very, very engaging.
Very skill intensive. I think one of the most skill intensive mirrors, or games in general, is an Icelander mirror, I think.
Especially with Constellus, right?
Yes.
Like, Luvin Constellus was a whole... Like, you'd ping yourself sometimes, to like just get the counter on it, and it messes up the math and everything, and it discounts your Waning Moon by 3, so you can use that to like break or frostbite. It's oh man, it was so intricate.
Technical, very technical, I would say. I do want to shout out a few mirrors that I think people might be overlooking or had maybe not experienced. I think the original chain mirrors were actually interesting. I would call it the Carrion Husk Dance was actually effectively what that game came down to, and actually was pretty technical and quite interesting, because the power level was actually so high that you had Carrion Husk, which could equalize some of these turns. It was quite interesting. You had to use it at the right time. The other is actually the Lightning Briar prior to the amendment of that hero ability, so that you could stack I'd say that the other match is not particularly interesting, but the mirror match was actually quite interesting because of the dance of damage into cards and how you used your cards, and how you used your arsenal particularly. I thought was really interesting, and even how you sideboarded in that matchup was quite interesting. I think Viserai mirrors at times have been somewhat interesting, but yeah, I agree for the most part in the last year and a half, and it's a big reason I don't play these decks anymore, or play very little of them. I don't like aggro mirrors. I think they're not what they had once been. I wish that they could maybe return to that. Also, just lastly, the Dorinthia mirror, actually kind of interesting. So, there you go.
Yeah, Warrior mirrors are interesting for sure. And the Warrior Assassin matchup, actually, it's not a mirror, but it does feel like kind of similar in that sense, where both people are playing with hidden information. The Viserai mirror, I think back in Skeletor days, I definitely didn't enjoy the Viserai mirror. It was basically a classic aggro. It was who drew Mordred Tide first, pretty much. Or Revel first. These days, though, I think the common through line out of the mirrors that I think we enjoy are the ones where both decks do want to block a little bit. Like, I think the Zen mirror today, like right now, like not Amsterdam, like right now, I think the Zen mirror right now is actually fine for an aggro mirror, because both sides do want to block a bit, which kind of means the game extends longer, which means there's just more room for skill expression and less, I drew my funny card and then I just blew you out.
Yeah, I have actually 3 last shout outs very quick. The title is Illusionist. 2 of you suck, 1 of you are great. The Prism and Enigma mirrors are god awful, so terrible to play, awful. They are a classic example of what this question is saying. Who drew the key card first? But the Dromai mirror, pre-Tome Imperial Flame, was one of the most interesting mirrors I've ever played. Nationals last year, or the year before now, we're in 2025. So 2023 Nationals top 8 match, I had an hour 45 Dromai mirror, which was so interesting against now Australian national champion Zach. So yeah, shout out Dromai mirrors.
Yeah, Dromai mirror had, I guess, as far as Illusionist mirrors go, more interplay, because there was this Ash. I mean, there was the managing your Ash as well. Oftentimes someone's behind on board, but they're high up on Ash, which was a very, very interesting dynamic. Also, she was the only illusionist. That was the only illusionist mirror where you don't want to be the first person to get a board, which I think is part of this. Like the Prism, the OG Prism, and the Enigma mirrors, the first one who gets a board kind of wants to protect it and like snowball it, and sometimes if the person can't match their aggression, it just snowballs and okay, they win. But with Dromai, it's like, oh, you play your first Rake, and then your opponent answers with the Asvaline, and they blew up your board, and then there was a lot more back and forth, it felt like.
Snowball is the key word. It's not a snowball game. Like, sometimes it is correct to be the first person to play the Rake because of the position, or you've seen them pitch an Asvaline, for instance, something like that, because you know where you're going to be in your second cycle. But it might still put you at a slight disadvantage, but it was game of small increments, and that's not usually the case with Illusionists. So, yeah. Where to next?
Oh, right. It's my question next. Okay. This one comes from Carlos, or at Zetrine. What 3 changes to the game would you like to see in the coming 2 years? I can go ahead and start with this one. I have 2 sort of categories. I have like a gameplay category, like in-game, and I have like an out-of-game category for this. So in-game wise, I want to see Icelander's return. I'm really excited for that one. The Icelander reprint. Warrior having a place in the meta. We touched on this at the beginning of the episode. And support for older heroes. I don't know if this is a hot take, or I don't know. Like, part of what comes to mind is I'm like, the WTR heroes, part of me is like, I would like to see them LL at some point. At the same time, it does feel like, their design is a little bit dated. I think that can be argued. So, it's a bit hard to be like, oh yeah, push Bravo to the point where he can LL, with the current state of the game. But I would like to see support for older heroes. It does fill me with a little bit of, I honestly don't know what the term, but a little bit of like regret that these older heroes are all just at the bottom of the LL leaderboard, and I like to see those come up, and Warrior having a place, and Icelander's return. That's in game. And before I move on to the next one, do you have anything?
You finish up, and then I'll rattle off 3.
Cool. So for outside of gameplay, I would, we touched on this recently. I'd like to see one CC only PT sometime in the next few years. I think that'll be fun. Coverage for smaller events. So, like this past weekend, we had two Battle Hardens, right? We had Atlanta and Hong Kong, and neither of them was streamed. And I know, obviously, coverage for these smaller events, I mean, budget restrictions and everything, it is very hard to get like full level, stream coverage for these things. But maybe even just recordings, right? Like, I think what Dice Commando did for the Battle Hardened, there was a Tetra calling Portland, for example, but he just did it on his own accord. But if we could have a bit more official, all right, we recorded this Battle Hardened that we couldn't stream, so that people can at least see the gameplay footage. I'd like to see that. And finally, casual play. Just a way for people to engage with the game that isn't, you need to be super competitive. Think like the equivalent of Commander for Magic, which kind of is hinted is coming out later this year. I don't know if it's PvE, but Smash Palace is what they're calling it. Don't know too much information about it, but yeah, casual play is something else I'd like to see come.
I have so many things, honestly. So I actually didn't write it. I just thought I'll rattle off the first three that come to my mind because I feel like I'm all the time thinking about things I would love to see in Flesh and Blood in a positive way, right? Like in terms of just, this is a great game. What next? Where next? And I think when it comes specifically to the next 2 years, you spoke about casual play there. And what does that look like? I have a slight riff off that. One thing I really is high on my list is a new format or a overhaul of Blitz that effectively brings a format that can be played at all levels, from casual right through to potentially even competitive Pro Tour Worlds play, but has a different feel. So I don't want Classic Constructed Light. And I think Living Legend is an interesting format, but it is the same thing effectively because of how this game works. It is an eternal game with Living Legend as the kind of check marker for sunsetting heroes and some cards for an unknown period of time. I want something that feels different. I'm not saying an overhaul of the way the game's played or the rule system or anything like that, but something that does give you another feel. I can't give more specifics than that. I don't know what it looks like. I'm not a game designer, but that's what I would love to see. And one that does span from a casual player being able to engage with it to a high-level pro player. I think it probably needs to be constructed. It probably isn't limited as much as I love limited. I think limited is it's a fairly settled formula in many ways, I think, and I don't think that's a bad thing. So that's pretty high up on the list for me. Another one is just more world building with Flesh and Blood. I think would be fantastic from a narrative standpoint. I'm actually not even a huge, when I play with cards, I don't think about flavor necessarily. Definitely, I'm on the lower end of the scale on that, but I do like that it is a big part of what this game could be. So more world building. I really miss actually the early days of Flesh and Blood where lore would really be fleshed out through the preview. Like you'd have previews, but you'd have so much lore attached to the previous season, from the stories to more understanding of the world of Wraith and all these things. I would love to see a bit more of that. And I think that's a great extension into getting players or getting people involved in Flesh and Blood who actually don't play the game or loosely play the game because they can follow along with something else. And I think my third thing, on a similar vein, but not dissimilar in some ways, is I would actually like to see, you spoke about older heroes being relevant. The thing I'd like to see in the next 2 years is what's the next evolution of those heroes? We saw another Bravo, which, okay, we've seen a Dorinthia, which, okay, it was a younger version. I want to see who is Reiner? Like, where is Reiner next? What's he up to? What is Katsu? Yeah, I'm keen on seeing Katsu. I'd like to see Bravo again at some point, but I would like to see some of those heroes revisited. I'm really excited to see Viscerai 2.0, I'll tell you what.
I want to ask you a little bit about what you said about having a different format, and you want it to feel different for both casual and high-level play. When you say feel different, do you still mean in a 1-versus-1 setting? Like, or do you mean like in a group sort of setting?
I don't know. I think I prefer my preference is always heads-up play. Is always 1v1. I think it's not. I'm not a big fan of multiplayer, but because the problem I have with multiplayer all the time is that games aren't designed for multiplayer. That's the problem with a lot of times trying to create a multiplayer game with the same rule set and the same base product or same base pieces, is that if I think about, for instance, how terrible is this? What's the multiplayer format called?
UPF.
Yeah, UPF. I feel like I'm spending like a quarter of my time or half my time like on my phone waiting for other people to do something, because either what they're doing right now is just completely irrelevant to me because we're playing with 5 players and I need to kill at least one other player before I can even interact with them in a meaningful way, or it just isn't interesting to me, like, honestly. So I think generally when the game's already established, like I said, I don't want them to change the rules. I don't want them to like completely break or remend the game, but I would be interested to see, effectively something that feels like the experience just feels a little bit different. I interact maybe differently with my opponent. I interact differently with how I show up to events, or even the style of, like, I'll use. I was trying to search for like what an example of this is, and I think it's when I'm going to take Magic here because it's the other game I know. When Magic would do special like events, or they would do like revisits of like old sets, for instance, for limited. So they've done like Ravnica Remastered, things like this. It brings us like a different feel to the games you're playing, while still being the same game effectively. And I think there's more you can push the envelope with that. I just don't know exactly what it is.
Well, fair enough. I definitely like my wish for the social play or the casual play is for it to actually not be competitive, which is why I was thinking this, like the PvE sort of thing. I don't know whether you ever played the World of Warcraft trading card game.
I did.
They used to have these raid. Oh yeah, well, you know about the raid decks in World of Warcraft. So I guess for people who don't know, you could go buy these raid decks, and then you and like a few of your friends would challenge the raid deck. Now in that game, you did need to have another player to play the raid boss, to play like the boss side of it. But if there's a way that Flesh and Blood can implement it, that it's not another player, that if it's, it's still you guys managing it, like sort of like think of a board game where the enemies move a certain way and you follow those rules, like Gloomhaven or something like that. If that could be the thing like that, that would be my ideal for what social play looks like in Flesh and Blood. It was like 3 of you kind of like going into a dungeon and then killing a bunch of bosses.
Hey, I mean, it's fine to have a dungeon master. I think I had very limited experience with those raid decks, but I think the problem was that it wasn't very enjoyable to play the raid boss from memory. So like find a way to make that enjoyable, and then I think you've got a great 3v1 game on your hands, So.
Yeah, I guess for me, I kind of wanted to take the competitive aspect of it out of it. Well, it was like
so entirely, like absolutely no competitive aspect at all.
I want it to be co-op. Yeah, that's like my wish for it. Like to me, that's like the ideal social casual play sort of experience. The sort of thing where I can actually, with some friends who aren't super into board games or into card games, like can take this out as like a, hey, let's all play this for a little bit of fun, and we're not against each other. We're actually just playing against the game, which would be very, very different from what Flesh and Blood currently is, where the only option is you are competing against the other person.
And the point of that is fun, right?
Yes, the point of that is fun.
Okay, good.
Fun. Yeah, that one.
All right. Next question comes from Liam Bennett, who I assume is Bennett of We Make Best, with a good question coming in here from, I think this is another X or Twitter question. For Pro Tour / Worlds level players, how would you look to improve without a team? Also, if there was a theoretical upper limit to skill in the game, 100 for the sake of a number, where do you think the average PT player currently is? I really like this question.
This is so interesting. I'm going to start on the second part, the theoretical upper limit to skill in the game. It's strange because I feel like the upper limit is also increasing in a sense. You see this with competitive games all the time, right? Where the top teams in certain games like today are way better than the top teams like 5 years ago. Like I think like Dota, for example. Mm-hmm. Like 5 years ago, the top teams, they were the top. They were incredible. But like the top teams
smaller.
of today are... Sorry?
Do you mean like the gap is smaller between...
No, I mean the ceiling just keeps going higher and higher. Like this theoretical upper limit, just like the best teams today are just way better than the best teams of back in the day. It was because people just keep getting better. So when I read this question, theoretical upper limit to skill in the game, like is that like today's upper limit? Because I think 5 years from now, the upper limit is going to be even higher. Is like my take.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that the theoretical upper limit is in my view, is a perfect game. That is the theoretical upper limit, is that you play a perfect game. So it's quite interesting because I think you look at chess, right? And chess doesn't have variance to it. And chess has a mappable perfect game, right? There's so many different sequences, as we know. There's so many different possible trees, right, to go down. But computers can do it. And actually, in chess they have a score which effectively tells you out of 100 is the game perfect. And there has been perfect games played by players. That doesn't mean that both players played perfect. In theory, if both players played perfect, it would be a draw, I think, is kind of the common consensus. But when you have variable elements, it changes that. And I think one thing I like to equate this to is like in bowling, right? A 300 is a perfect game. You knock down every single pin in the immediate frame. You don't miss a pin, right? Effectively. And that is a perfect game. And there is variables in bowling. There is the way in which something collides off another element. There is the oil that's on the lane. There is how sweaty your hand is when there's all these things, right? But people play perfect games all the time in bowling. It's a game that's been around for so long. It's a contained, short, repeatable game, right? And then I like to look at both those two games comparative to Flesh and Blood, which is, in comparison, an infinitely more complex game because of the modality of the game and the cards, but also the variance that's instilled in it. So I think in theory, the theoretical upper limit is still a perfect game, I guess, but it also includes variance where you have to account for variance. So can you ever play a perfect game? Maybe, but not on purpose. But you can have this, and I think that's what's interesting. You're talking about upper limits moving, right? So in theory, if you say, okay, we account for variance, and we, rather than a theoretical upper limit, we talk about a practical upper limit, which is the highest level of skill we're seeing in the game. I think, yeah, it keeps moving, right? And I think it's going to keep moving as the game develops and as players get better and better. I think there's concepts in this game that aren't understood at all. Even there's definitely concepts that are understood very little, but there's even concepts that I think are just not understood at all. So I think if I take today's upper limit, then I think, if I'm thinking of the best players in the world, the Pablo Pintors, the Michael Hamiltons, the Nick Butchers, then I think probably the average PT player the gap is smaller than people think. I think the average PT player is probably in, the top 10 to 15%, I think, of skill.
Oh, interesting. I was going to go with the top players in the sort of 90, but then the average PT player, I was going to say in the 70s. But I do want to go back to what you were saying.
Unpick anything you want.
You were talking about the perfect game and how you can't play a perfect game in Fab, or you can't intentionally as well.
Sure.
Because of variance. And I do want to touch on that then. I do think you can, despite... So I guess... Okay. So if you're going to bring variance into this is why you can't play a perfect game in Fab, I would say that you still can. So if I make a decision based on a certain outcome, so I'm like, okay, 70% chance this thing happens and 30% chance this thing happens, for example. Or, very obvious, I haven't seen a single Mordred tide yet. High likelihood I'll see in my next hand, and I make my current decision on this turn based on that happening, on the high likelihood sort of event happening. But that event didn't happen. Suppose my next hand still didn't have the Mordred tide, which I was looking for. I still think that I made the correct decision. In which case, isn't that still moving towards playing the perfect game? Yeah.
I guess it depends is that the correct decision or is it the perfect decision? There's unknown information, right? So depending on what your next hand is, it may or may not be the best possible limit of, I guess, when it comes to Flesh and Blood, you're talking about damage output or rune chant creation in that standpoint, to have or to not have the Mordred tide available to you, depending on what the other cards are, right?
Yeah. So, okay, I would argue that making the correct decision, if I have made a decision where I'm playing towards something that's going to have a higher likelihood of happening rather than not, I would lean that towards that person is playing perfectly. To the information that they have available to them, they are taking the path of most likelihood. Therefore, it is perfect. Even if the lesser likelihood outcome ends up happening, I would still say their play was perfect. But it seems like you might be thinking, you might be believing otherwise, where it's about what actually ends up happening rather than...
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm talking about it in a theory standpoint. I guess the way you're talking about it is the way we should talk about it. Like, that is the correct play. That is the best possible decision made with the available information that you have, right? And that is if you do that every single time, you will win a lot of games of Flesh and Blood, because you are making the best possible decision with the information or the approximation of information that you have on your side of the board and your opponent's side of the board. But I'll give like a specific example of like what I think would be a perfect, and why I think you can't necessarily, why I say correct and perfect and maybe different is, let's say that you're playing Brute, and the correct decision to kill your opponent next turn is to set up a Bloodrush Bellows in your arsenal, and then you draw a non-6 and you discard the non. It might have actually been your hand could have had more damage if that card was not a Bloodrush Bellow, but it was a Scarf or a Scarf, for instance. Like there is I guess there's like perfect, and then there's correct based on the information, the decision that you can make in the time. And the correct decision, when you know that there's only 2 misses left in your deck, is to arsenal that Bloodrush Bellows. Probably. There might be other decisions that give you a 100% win rate that aren't arsenal the Bloodrush Bellows because your opponent's on 1 life, for instance. It might be like, I 100% know a Reckless Swing is on my next hand. So the correct decision is to make sure that I pass my hand with 3, whatever. 3 6s, whatever it is.
Right, but in that first case where you're like, the correct decision is to arsenal Bloodrush, but then you draw one of your 2 misses, and that's a very low likelihood of happening. So you would, I guess in your definition, you would say that wasn't perfect play because the next hand didn't have the outcome that they were playing towards.
I would say it's not a perfect,
despite it being the lower likelihood.
Yeah, I would say it's not going to eventuate to a perfect game, but it's going to, because and I think this is all. The theory, right? Of like, where do you put variables and the unknown versus the known? And I'm just holding the difference between correct and perfect. But I guess either way, right? The more that to Liam's point about where is the upper limit of skill, skill is not the same as playing a perfect game, right? Like having the right skills to deduce with known information or approximate information is to make the correct play. And I think that I think that limit is still going to get bigger and bigger, but I think we're a lot closer than maybe people think. Like, in terms of with the information at your disposal, it's not that insane to be able to process all the information for, especially decks that are very simple and linear in their nature. What is way harder is doing that for your opponent as well, to work out what they most likely have in hand, what they're most likely going to do, what their strategy is, what card is in their arsenal, what card they might have bottomed with the sink below, for instance. Or to do it with a much more complex deck. That is where the challenges come in, I think.
So there was an earlier part of this question that we haven't answered yet, which was for Pro Tour and Worlds level players, how would you look to improve without a team? I'm wondering if you have any insight. I guess for me, where I'd start is analyze my own replays. That was the way I started, and the way I tried to get better at the game was, I'd play games, I'd record them, and then just look back at my decisions with an outside perspective, and I think that helps a lot for getting the ground running. Or that's definitely not the saying, but good to get you started.
I think sometimes having a team is not always the right fit for everyone as well. So you might want to do this anyway. I think the best way to get better at Flesh and Blood is to be critical about your play, and sometimes that is going to be with bigger groups, but that's not always going to be the best case. Sometimes it might be with smaller groups. I think there's a lot of things made about the information gathering and access to the best decks and all this sort of thing, but in a game like Flesh and Blood, that is, I think, secondary to really understanding what decks are doing in a format, how decks play, win conditions, how to extract the most out of the deck that you're playing. I think that is because of the hero-centric nature, because of the generic versus class-based nature of the game. I think we've just seen that time and time again. And so I kind of echo what you said, right? Like, what are the factors that you can use to self-evaluate, or to maybe do that with like one other person or max 2 other people? Like, it doesn't have to be in this team setting, I think. And it could be as simple as you play armories you can even do this at armories, right? You go play against a player, and then afterwards you have a reflection on the game. You ask your opponent about situations in the game, or why they did this or why they did that, and then you'll learn things every time. Or you could even play another game straight afterwards to just get more experience playing the game. So I think no matter what level, I mean, this is saying for Pro Tour Worlds level players, I think you can do this at any level. I think if you genuinely want to, your goal is to cash a PT, top 8 a PT, these sorts of things, I think you can still do this without a team. You just have to take this to the next level, invest a lot of time, keep an ear to the ground in terms of like metagame and expectations of how the format's shaping out as well, because that is super important at that level, I think.
To your point about you can definitely do well at the PT without a team, I want to shout out Mara Faris for that. PT Baltimore, she got second place, and as far as I know, I hope I'm not making this up, as far as I know, she wasn't part of any team at that point. That was when she sort of, I mean, she was already known as a content creator and of course her alters, but that was when she had an incredible result without testing with a team beforehand, just off the back of her own work and her own understanding, analysis of her gameplay and her deck, with a very, very unique spin on Dromai as well. She was one always advocating for Empress Dromai, brought her to second at PT. So for those people who feel a little bit, I don't know, demoralized or dejected that all these top players that we keep seeing are part of these teams, and it's like you find it very difficult to get into those teams, I think there is inspiration. There are people in previous PTs as well. Their names are escaping me, but if you just look at the list of top 8s from past few PTs, you will find people who got there without testing with an established team, just be testing with people at the armories who are also looking for the same goals.
100%. I feel like I'm going to get roasted in the comments for my response to that question and my my delineation of perfect and correct, Pankaj. We'll see. I feel like I'm going to get torn down.
So next question, we're looking at YouTube at this point, from Samuel Perry, 1634. Great pod as always. Well, thank you. Question: what non-gameplay advice would you have for attending large tournaments? For example, I've learned how essential it is to locate an easily accessible source of water so I can stay hydrated throughout the weekend. What other tips would you have based on your own experiences for tournaments outside of the games themselves?
I get so infuriated when there is not a water fountain at an event. Like, I just don't. And you ask a staff member and they're like, oh yes, you go to the bathroom to fill your water. It's like, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I go to the bathroom and fill up my water bottle. I definitely always, so if we go to the PT, for instance, on the players meeting on the Thursday and the banquet, which is now, I guess, the keynote speech, I will always be on the lookout to make sure, like, okay, what is the water situation for tomorrow? What is the food situation? I think having a plan for like what you're going to eat during the day. And there's people who are like, I don't eat when I play. That's fine. That's your thing. I need to personally keep fueled, so I will make sure, and I like to eat food that I know is going to make me feel good and not give me an upset stomach halfway through the day. So I will keep it very simple, maybe a sandwich for lunch, or a wrap or whatever, but nothing like super greasy or heavy. A lot of like small snacks to get me through the day. I actually generally don't eat. I eat breakfast and then I don't usually eat lunch. I'll eat like snacks, maybe a small sandwich or something. And then the other thing is just making sure I have everything pre-sorted. So like sideboard notes, my deck list is already done like the day before. I've double checked my sleeves. Just no stress. I don't want any stress on the day. I want to be able to think solely about the games I'm playing and nothing, or the conversations I'm having with people and catching up with people. I don't want to be thinking about, oh, I need to go replace my sleeves halfway through a day, or I didn't bring sleeves for the draft portion. I need to go and buy them when I get there. Oh, they don't have the sleeves I like, or ones that, you know, they've only got see-through ones and we're at the Miss Fail World premiere, for instance, which did happen, by the way. Things like this. So I think it's about preparation and being ready to make sure that when you get there on the day, you can just play your games. Take any kind of extra mental load out of your day. And I think the sideboard notes is a big one on that. People often will just be like, no, I remember them. It's like, yeah, you might remember them, but just write them down, because then you don't have to recall them and potentially make a mistake. They're just there on paper and you just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, done. That's my view.
Mine is regarding more towards the food thing again, which you touched on, which was, so I do the same, where I'll just start the day with breakfast and then I probably won't eat like a proper meal until after the tournament is done, but I will always have snacks on me. So So to your point about preparation, the day before, I would figure out where I'm going to get my breakfast from, because I don't want to be like hunting around the morning of. So I'm going to figure out where my breakfast is, where I'm like getting my, I don't know, my sausage sandwich or whatever. And then in my bag, I will always have cereal bars on me, which I can snack on throughout the day. Cereal bars, nuts, and dark chocolate as well is kind of like the snacks I'll typically have. And if I manage to hit up a grocery store the day before, I would also have bananas on me. Like just these dense, high energy foods that you can snack on that kind of keep you full and you kind of enjoy eating as well. Just to keep you fueled throughout the day until you can have your dinner. Because you can't bank on having a long enough break in between rounds. Even if you're playing a fast deck, you can't bank they're going to have enough time to go get something from a concession stand, necessarily get something hot. So yeah, having those kind of snacks on me would be my essential advice.
Yeah, simple
do
carbohydrates.
what Brody does with the ham sandwich thing. You see him, he has a tote bag of like 12 ham sandwiches, which is just, it's very, very good.
Yeah, simple carbohydrates. A bit of protein in there. I think my other one is just be ready to have fun. That's number one about what it sounds silly and lame, but honestly, I think what also being prepared allows you to do is enjoy the experience and enjoy the event that you're at, and not have to worry about anything else. And you can finish your round and chat to your opponent for 5 minutes if you want to, and not have to be rushing off because you're like, I need to go and find X because I don't have it. So yeah, love it.
And my last one will be sleep. Yes, for me, like I need to be very well rested. I don't know how some people will be like, just like, oh yeah, I slept like 5 hours and then they, like EXO in Swiss. I'm like, so for me, it's sleep, and this is not always possible because sometimes these events are obviously overseas and jet lag is a thing that some people experience. I know you don't, Hayden, for some reason, but us mortals do experience that. So if you have the luxury to, if you can get in like a day or two earlier to help combat the jet lag before you have to start playing, that would be the other thing.
All right. I think we've got time for one last question. And again, we will use these questions. We have some things up our sleeve. You can expect to hear some answers to these questions. I'm going to go with this, though. This is another YouTube question, Pankaj, from Milan Pekni. What would be your guess for next Talented Ranger?
If you asked me a few months ago, I would have guessed Draconic. But we already know there's a Draconic set happening, and it's not, and there's no Ranger in it. Next Talented... Do you have a guess while I think?
I think it's Elemental. I think it's an Elemental Ranger. And I think it comes... I mean, they might do another Elemental set even so quickly after Rosetta, but I think it probably just comes in the form of a different kind of set, potentially, or an expansion, or... Yeah, I don't know. But I think it might be Elemental.
I'm... in between. Okay, it's probably not Shadow. That doesn't. But Mystic, I could totally see a Mystic Ranger being absolutely awesome. So I'm gonna go with Mystic. I wouldn't say that's my best guess, but I would say that's the type of Ranger I want to see the most. So I'm just gonna say Mystic.
Honestly, I think the most likely is neither of our thoughts there, and it as just a new talent. I think that's actually the most likely, but we shall see. Well. Thank you, everyone, for all your questions. As we say, we love questions on Arsenal Pass. It's almost like it's a feature every week with the Commander Cookout, and we love doing these mailbags. We will, as I say, get to more of these questions either in the Commander Cookout over the next few weeks or through other means. We will answer them. If you do want to get questions in for future Commander Cookout, please do so. Either email us, arsenalpassfab@gmail.com, YouTube, Discord, Twitter, handwritten note, whatever you want to do. With that said, anything you want to finish on, Pankaj, before we wrap up?
I just want to say thank you to everyone as well for all the questions, and we're sorry for the ones that we couldn't get to, but as Hayden said, we will do our best to get to them at some point in the future.
100%. Well, until next time, we will see you on the next episode of Arsenal Pass.